again for thank you, Rachel, for remembering to record. And Michael, thank you again for agreeing to moderate the session. Michael is a PhD student in civil environmental engineering and has been doing some very exciting work with solar panel soiling and film detection. And we thought it would be a wonderful conversation to have Michael and Avery talk. And I will hand it over to Michael to introduce Avery and kick it off.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and hear a little bit about what Avery is doing, and looking forward to seeing what kind of questions you all have for her. So before I officially, introduce Avery, I'm sure people might have questions throughout the session. So I was thinking maybe the best way to do it is just put them in the chat. We can go through them after, and then if we still have extra time, we can, kind of use the hand raise feature in Zoom and keep it more conversational. Avery is currently a marine ecologist and conservation biologist at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which I think is the most tongue twister of all of the government agencies. And Avery currently has a focus on strategies surrounding the ever-increasing presence of human-made habitats in our marine world. So I would rather Avery tell you more about what she does. So to start with that, could you expand a little bit on your background?
Sure. So I'll start with, undergraduate. So I got my undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia. And after that, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but didn't understand exactly how to make that happen. So took a year off and was really influential, headed out to the West Coast and was able to get in the field out in the San Juan Islands in Washington, one of the most magical spots, and then headed to graduate school. And I did graduate school for my doctorate degree at UNC Chapel Hill. And because I'm a marine scientist, my focus was on coastal ecosystems. And so the way that program was set up is similar to some of the Duke programs, where I spent my first year on main campus in Chapel Hill and then headed down to the coast. And after that, I conducted a postdoctoral fellowship with Duke University, as well as a consortium of aquariums that were part of a nonprofit organization. And then following that, I moved over to my current role, which is with NOAA, as you said. So huge tongue twister, but basically the group I'm in with NOAA, I'm a contractor for NOAA. I work for an organization called CSS Inc. And we do a lot of science to help support decisions that resource managers are making to sustain thriving ecosystems and coastal economies.
Great. Got it. Zoom, never get used to it. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got the job that you have today, a little bit more about that path specifically?
Definitely. And feel free to interrupt with questions if anybody has them. Like Michael said, drop them in the chat, but hopefully this can be conversational instead of just me spouting out. But so my current role, one of the things I didn't realize, when I was looking for jobs, is that there's two ways to work within the federal government in an agency like NOAA. And one of those roles is to get a federal position. So you're a federal employee. Another option is to be a contractor. Some people are contractors for a short amount of time for a particular project. Other people can, I have colleagues who've been contractors for 20 years in some cases. And so that was a flavor of job that I didn't know existed. So that's one of the points that I wanted to kind of drive home today, that there are these two different avenues to get into a position like the one I'm in. And so the group that I work with is located in Beaufort, North Carolina. So it's literally on the same island as the Duke University Marine Lab. So you can see one building from the next, et cetera. And it is a group that is very active in a variety of research. The work we do is usually focused on mapping habitats on the seafloor and trying to understand how diversity of marine life are using them. And so my skill set was one with the particular ecological focus that I'd had in graduate school and postdoc experience that fit into some of the projects we were doing. I had the quantitative skills and some of the project management and ship-based skills that they were looking for too. So it was well, I think natural fit.
So we have a question, if, like you said, we want to keep it more conversational and just do it as we go. So August asked, could you talk a little bit more about what being a contractor for the government means?
Sure. So being a contractor means that I work for a company that is, and I'm contracted out to the government. So I'm working on government funded projects, but through a contracting company. Does that help clarify that, August? I know it's kind of confusing terminology, but basically it is usually a shorter term position that is more subject to like particular project end dates and skills and other focuses, I think would be my best way of describing it.
Yeah.
And I should say that a lot of the federal government is a blended workforce. So a lot of the folks at the NOAA lab in Beaufort, for example, are contractors, and there are federal employees there as well. And so it's a really great working relationship. Yes.
So not to hijack the conversation, but I can chime in because I was a contractor. Actually, I was on loan and worked with both contractors and federal employees at the NIEHS for a little bit, the
Perfect.
Institute for Environmental Health Sciences. So the bottom line is it's really, really difficult to create federal positions. It is literally an act of Congress to create like a new job opening for a federal position, right? So that is something that is, you know, pensioned and is in the federal budget. There is a lot more flexibility to create positions that can be contracted out, whether, as Avery said, whether it's 6 months or 3 years, or it's an ongoing thing. One of the people I worked with, so I worked as a data scientist. One of the women I worked with had been a federal contractor for NIHS for 8 years when I was there. And that was, you know, that was like 5 years ago. She's still there. So, you know, this is pretty much her career, and day to day contractors join the team meetings. They have access to the same information. They have the same decision-making power, I guess, or input. Your benefits are a little different because your benefits are different because your benefits are paid through the contracting company rather than through the federal. So you don't get the federal pension, but in our case at NIEHS, it was Kelly Contracting was the HR firm that hired the contractor. So you would get, you know, you would get health insurance, you get paid time off, you'd get the same holidays as federal employees, but it was through, you wouldn't get the pension and other benefits. So
yeah, thank you so much for adding that.
I hope that helps to answer a little bit. Any follow-on questions about that? Or Avery, anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you covered it. I think for me, I thought that most of the people who worked at the NOAA lab were federal employees, and I didn't even understand that distinction when I was beginning to look for jobs. And so I wish somebody had told me that when I was in the job searching phase and starting to finish up my degree program. So that's one of the things I wanted to make sure that was conveyed today. And so for NOAA, for example, there's multiple different companies that can hire contractors. So if that's something that you all are interested in, let me know and feel free to reach out after this. I'm happy to try to point you in the right direction and at least give you some of those contracting company names to look at.
Great.
So I see another question about what are ship-based skills. So thanks for clarifying that. So that was a term I just kind of threw in there. So for a lot of my research, I think this actually feeds into another question you might be about to ask, Michael, which is kind of what does the day-to-day look like? And before COVID, we would spend a fair amount of time planning for field missions, processing and analyzing data, synthesizing those data, writing publications and reports, working on acquiring funding, et cetera. But we also spent a tremendous amount of time in the field, either on small ships or on big research vessels. So 200, 300 feet, for example, in length. And so when I mentioned ship-based skills, I had a lot of hands-on experience in the field, leading teams of individuals to accomplish particular ecology and habitat mapping and assessment missions. And so that was something that I used tremendously prior to COVID. And now our field work is starting to ramp back up again.
You mentioned in your bio that you did some stuff with remotely operated vehicles to Avery, is that correct? That to me
is
seems
correct.
like you were driving around semi-aquatic robots. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, basically, you got the gist of it. So our team does a lot with advanced technologies. And so sometimes, for example, we'll put scientific divers underwater to try to assess habitats and understand how fish and other predators, et cetera, are using them. But one of the most effective ways for us to do that, if we don't have divers or need to do something without divers in the water, so as not to startle the fish, for example, is to go with robotic options. And so one of the things that we do pretty frequently is we have a remotely operated vehicle. It's basically an underwater robot, but it's tethered to the boat. So we sit on the boat and kind of like a video game controller, we drive the robot around and we're watching what it's seeing through a live video that we get back up through its tether to the boat. Other options that our team is pursuing right now include autonomous underwater vehicles. So imagine like a little like torpedo shaped vehicle that has its own propulsion. And you can program it to go in certain areas of the ocean and collect different data. So we're using those. There's also some really cool new developments in unoccupied surface vehicles, for example, which is in simpler terms, a boat with nobody on it that can be programmed to go, again, wherever you need it to go and accomplish whatever data collection mission you have it set to do. And so that's been one of the really fun parts for me about this job, is getting to use some of the more traditional techniques and then also be at the forefront of some of these advanced technologies and working with our group that again includes contractors and federal employees to pick the right tool for that particular task we have at hand. And the other thing I should say is that the group within NOAA that I'm based in, so more acronym soup, but it's the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science. And basically, a lot of our research is client or customer driven. So we're approached by other federal agencies or state agencies to help solve a particular problem. And so way back in the beginning of this call, I mentioned that we do a lot of science to help support decisions. So that's kind of how that happens. An example of that is one project we're working on right now with the state of North Carolina, where they need to understand, they sink used ships and concrete bridge pieces and other things to form human-made reefs. So they're creating new habitats on the seafloor, and they need to understand which materials they should be using and how they should place those in the seafloor to get the most bang for their buck in terms of fish and other critters. So that's an example of having that client with a really direct and applied outcome for our research.
Very cool. So for postdocs and PhD students who are looking to get into work like this or work in a similar field or agency, I mean, what kind of prep can they start doing now? Do you have anything that you wish somebody told you to start doing earlier than later?
Yes, actually. So I was fortunate that during my PhD program, I was able to collaborate with folks at the NOAA lab here in Beaufort. And that was really valuable because I was able to meet those folks, understand what they do, what their mission is, and what sorts of skills they need for people who work with them. So I think if there's any opportunity to start that conversation with somebody or even stop by for a day and see what's happening, again, complicated with COVID and the fact that the NOAA lab is effectively shut down at the moment. But I think virtually there's still plenty of opportunities. So I think if there's, I guess, in a more concise manner, if there's internship opportunities or fellowship opportunities available, or opportunities for collaboration with somebody within our organization, I think that's a beneficial thing to pursue. Other than that, I think particular skills. So for our group, this is not NOAA wide, but for our particular group, quantitative skills are really critical, and skills with working with spatial data. So experience with GIS and spatial analyses, things of that nature. But again, we have all types of folks working with our group. We have some folks who have more of an engineering background who can help troubleshoot issues with the marine robots and deal with electrical wiring and all sorts of stuff. We have some folks in our habitat mapping team, there's 2 of us with PhD degrees. Some other folks have masters, some have college degrees, some have community college degrees. And so that's also something that I was not aware of when I was thinking of jobs. And so I say that as a way to say that there's all types and backgrounds that are really valuable for our organization.
So you mentioned that, the skills were important. Like your particular position was looking for GIS skills, things like that. Do you have any advice on kind of how to highlight those? Say somebody is looking to apply to a job, how to really make those skills stand out and kind of bring that to the forefront of an application?
Yeah, I think oftentimes a cover letter is a great place to do that. Other options include providing an example, especially during an interview, if you're verbally asked the question of how you have applied that particular skill to a problem. So I think kind of sky's the limit there. I think there's many ways of highlighting that information, and I don't have a phenomenal suggestion on which one is better than the other. But I'd say it kind of depends on that individual's skill set and the job description and what the job need is. But I think in most cases, it's beneficial in the cover letter, obviously, and you guys know this, to specify how you meet the requirements of that particular job.
Great, thank you. So I know you mentioned a little bit that you guys are almost completely closed down with COVID. Is that right?
Sort of, yes. So we are still pretty much in maximum telework at the moment. And so some of our big ships, our big research ships have continued to operate. And so we've been able to continue our field work. But my colleagues and I are all working remotely from our homes right now and have been since March 2020 for the most part.
I'm sure some people are happy about that, maybe others not so much. But so is there kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, at least in your organization? Does it look like things are going to start getting back to normal, more in-person work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. We're getting new guidance on a relatively regular basis, and I think we're all just kind of waiting to see what happens. But I will say that one of the things that we were nervous about was how will we be able to continue our field work, be able to continue our collaborations. And it's actually, at least for me personally, led to a lot of collaborations that I may not have had otherwise, because the Beaufort Lab is a pretty small group within NOAA, and as opposed to Silver Spring, which is the headquarters, right, where folks are able to interact with each other and have lunch with each other and develop those relationships and colleagues more easily. And so it actually kind of broke down a barrier of us being on the same footing as everybody with video calls and being able to have some more of those collaborations.
So do you think in terms of maybe working with government agencies doing, whether it's research or contracting work or a bit of both, do you think that the way that COVID has kind of forced everybody to operate now, do you think it's going to cause permanent changes? Like you said, kind of a little bit more flexible in where you work and who you're working with and how that work is done. Do you think that this is going to have long-term impacts?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And I honestly don't know the answer to that. There are talks about increased flexibility, but we don't yet understand exactly what that'll look like following COVID or whatever happens in the next several months. So I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but we don't have those facts yet.
I think that's how everybody feels. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so we have a question from Stephen. Stephen said, global warming is a huge issue from your perspective. Can you discuss the various roles of government, contractors, politicians, researchers, and fix-it people and local communities in keeping our planet safe?
Yeah, Stephen, that's a really insightful question, and that's a complicated question. So I'm just going to barely, I think, scratch the surface. I think that's a very complex landscape, but what I will say is that within my role, we often collaborate with folks in other branches of NOAA or other entities within NOAA. So we're the National Ocean Service, so we do a lot on habitats and communities of marine life. And we have colleagues at the National Weather Service. We have colleagues at the National Marine Fisheries Service, for example, who focus on particular fish species. And so we come together within NOAA with other government agencies. So right now we're working with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management on some wind energy and other related topics. We come together with researchers from academia, some from private industry. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about this job, is getting to work with so many folks who are involved with these decision-making, with the decision-making. So I guess my answer isn't directly related to global warming and climate change, but it's related more to the fact that in this particular role and within our organization, there's a lot of collaboration with external partners across multiple sectors.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I have one for you, Avery, if nobody else does. Okay, I'll ask. So you're doing this science, right? And then eventually the idea is that tangible action takes place as a result of the science, right? Could you talk a little bit about how that works, kind of, I guess, that transition from science to policy to action, and kind of your role in it, or, you know, are you kind of passing that off to somebody else? If you could just expand on that, that would be great.
Definitely. So our role within that currently, with where I am in the organization, where our group is that we do the science that provides information that people can use to make decisions. So we actively disseminate that information to the folks who are in decision-making roles so that they can make decisions, implement policy changes if needed, et cetera. And so that's one of the things that I keep saying that I really enjoy. I really do love my job, but that's one of the things that I enjoy, is that all of our scientific research does have that really applied bent because of our mission, that we're doing research to help solve a particular problem or fill a particular knowledge gap, and that information will be used by folks for ecosystem-based management, place-based management, marine spatial planning. So a lot of the work that our group does, for example, looks at how humans are using various parts of the coastal ocean and trying to understand how we should be planning for those. So how should a marine protected area be designed? How should and where should wind energy infrastructure be placed? How do you minimize conflicts with other uses of the coastal ocean, like shipping, et cetera?
I think that a forward-looking perspective is a good place to wrap up and conclude with some final, if you have any final thoughts, but wanted to thank you again, Avery, for being so generous with your time and your expertise. And we will, as I mentioned, record this session and make it available as part of the alum Zoom series. I know there were several competing parallel workshops, but there's a lot of interest in hearing your experiences and your stories. And also thank you, Michael, for moderating and keeping the flow going so well. And I'll just give both of you a chance for any concluding thoughts, and then we can all hopefully convene back at the wrap up.
Perfect. Well, thank you all very much for having me today. As I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to answer questions and try to put you in touch with colleagues if that's something you're interested in. And Michael, thank you very much for moderating is the word I'm looking for.
It was a pleasure. Yes, thank you.
Thank you all very much. See you all at the
Bye, everybody.
Zoom. Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.